Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to welcome you to the Socially Responsible Business Advocacy panel as part of One Community's 2021 Point of Pride Summit. I'm Katie Loic Sunday, and I'm the Government and Community Affairs Manager at Apple. And we are so happy to support this event. And I want to thank Angela and everyone at One Community for all of the critical work that they do to create an LGBTQ inclusive community in Arizona. So over the next hour, this group will be discussing the importance of social responsibility and business advocacy. Internally, that means adopting policies that support and benefit an inclusive workplace. And externally, it's how businesses are taking action and speaking out on issues that impact society. We'll hear from our panelists and hear about how their organizations are working at the intersection of good business practice and social change. So first, I'd like to start by having our panelists introduce themselves. Neil, how about we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Katie, and thanks One Community and to all of you who are watching and participating today. I'm Neil Giuliano. I'm with Greater Phoenix Leadership, which is the consortium of CEO level talent from the business community here in the metropolitan area.
Great. And Vince, how about you next?
Sure. My name is Vince Kozar. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of what we call our Arena Sports Group here at the Phoenix Suns, which is our smaller properties, which includes the Phoenix Mercury, formerly the Northern Arizona Suns, and also our operating interest in the Arizona Rattlers.
Great. And Tyler.
Hi, Tyler Conaway. I am a Senior Manager in Enterprise Risk Management at PayPal. I'm also a member of our Global Steering Committee for PayPal Pride, which is our LGBTQ plus employee resource group. I also am the chair of the Chandler Human Relations Commission, and I co-chair the Chandler Chambers Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for the introductions. Let's begin the conversation by focusing internally. So creating and sustaining an inclusive workplace is a core tenet of responsible leadership in business. It can help individuals feel supported, and it can inspire employees to take action on issues that they feel are important to them. So for all of you, what do your businesses do internally to promote inclusion in a socially responsible business culture? Maybe Tyler, you could kick us off.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think really what your question speaks to is more around strategy. I think a lot of companies began their experiments in employee resource groups, really tentatively engaging with obvious holidays, pride months. How do we just create some visibility? And what you're speaking to, I think, is really more of a holistic approach where inclusivity comes at the start of an employment relationship. So one of the things we do that I think is really exceptional with inclusivity is, as part of an onboarding experience, our employees are introduced to all the employee resource groups. We show the intersectionality of different groups in business and give employees an opportunity to find and participate in any of the groups that really speak to them. And I think from there, you really just launch into how do you keep employees connected to different activities? It's the same challenge you have with anything, but I think in inclusivity, you're creating visibility and you're creating a sense of being championed, welcomed, that there aren't barriers to you succeeding. And I think you just start by really just introducing your culture of inclusivity at the start of the relationship, and then just continue with activities through ERGs, through your acts. Externally, you demonstrate that not only is that individual included, but you respect other individuals like your employee. You'll stand up for them in society. So I think all those things kind of factor into you demonstrating that you stand by all your employees equally.
That's great. Thank you, Tyler. Neil or Vince, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, Tyler's answer was great. I think the only thing that I would add for a company like ours, which is so public facing and so fan facing, is that, we try to remember that, and I know we'll talk a little bit about the microphone later, but we have a platform as a professional sports organization, and we're very conscious of the history of social progress that has come on the heels of activism by athletes and activism by sports organizations. So I think the first thing is understanding that when we're publicly taking a position, whether that be related to the value of Black lives, or whether that be related to the Asian American Pacific Islander community, or whether that be in relation to pride or women's equality or anything like that, we're taking that position publicly. And we're also demonstrating to our internal constituencies what we're all about. So we actually, as much as professional sports, these franchises are valued at billions of dollars. We're actually small businesses. We don't have more than 250 full-time employees. So we're actually sort of behind, but working to catch up to where Tyler and PayPal is at in terms of employee resource groups, which we're working through. But then the last thing I would say is we are very intentional with the partners we select and who we align ourselves with. Both the Suns and the Mercury have a badge on each of their jerseys. PayPal is the logo there. And it's not lost on us that we're aligning ourselves with a company that shares our values. It's incredibly important, both externally and internally.
That's awesome. Thanks, Vince. Neil, do you have anything you want to add to that question?
Well, I think I would just point out, because both Tyler and Vince, of course, have nailed it. But the reality is, in our broader business community, we have folks who are very attuned and very focused on culture and aligning culture with their actions and so forth. And then we have some that are not yet. So our ecosystem is full of both of those. And I think the role that all of us can play is to encourage and support a little bit of challenge when the challenge is necessary, and bring some folks along to have them start to take part in more of the activities that Tyler and Vince are identifying for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. And I see we had a question come up in the chat, which Tyler, I think probably is best suited for you, but we have Elena is asking about what you think about ERG leaders being compensated for their work.
Absolutely, it's a great question. And I think for reference for folks out there that may not necessarily have the context around it, a lot of the employee resource group efforts at corporations come from really more like voluntary contributions from employees, people who want to contribute to creating the employee resource group and a lot of the philanthropic things that are done. I think for ERG leaders, there's definitely a fair case for compensation. You see a lot of companies really working to evolve their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs to be more focused on creating actual roles for those ERG leaders. I think as companies sort of evolve and say, this isn't something that we can resource exclusively with just employees. This isn't something that we can resource exclusively with volunteer efforts. This is a bigger enterprise, and I think we'll talk about it a little later, but as companies try to become a social enterprise, I think they have to demonstrate that with resources. Recently, at PayPal in 2020, we made some big announcements around us taking some funds off of our balance sheet, around $500 million towards equity, really supporting Black-owned businesses in America, and really kind of starting that cycle of investing in communities. We also earmarked a lot of funds for our actual diversity programs, which included funding for positions, other things that also help like take off some of that resource burden that ERG leaders feel. So I think it's an absolutely fair issue. I do think they should be compensated. And I also think it's really just kind of part of how we evolve that function of diversity, equity, and inclusion in corporate America, which is seemingly to me moving more in the direction of other functions where you have an officer, a role, reporting structure within your boards, and those ultimately roll up to the CEOs and companies. So continue to evolve in that direction, and I think that's really just putting resources into it.
That's great. Thanks, Tyler.
The one thing I would add is that this work is work. It's not a hobby.
Exactly.
It's not an aside. And as we all know, budgets indicate values and budget indicate priorities. And so if it's part of your values and it's part of your priorities, then there should be a place for it within whatever structure you may have as an organization to say, this is important and these are the resources we're putting toward advancing these ideas and this work.
Thank you. I agree with both of you. And I think that insight will be helpful for any other organizations that are listening in, big or small. I think that that's an excellent point. So let's look at a broader level. We're seeing businesses become more publicly outspoken on community and policy issues. This includes advocacy on issues like voting rights, racial equity, rights for the LGBTQ community, immigration, and more. Have your organizations chosen to speak out on a particular topic recently?
So yes, I think one of the things that we've learned over the course of the last year, hopefully we knew it a little before then, but what we've really learned over the course of the last year is that sometimes leading is getting out of the way so that other people can. And we have athletes who have some things to say and have really educated, thoughtful opinions that they've come to hold after a lifetime of whatever experiences they've had. And so in a lot of situations, our responsibility is just to use our platform to amplify what it is they have to say, but to get out of the way and let them lead. I think a really good example is last year in the WNBA bubble. One of the WNBA teams was owned by the Kelly Loeffler, who was running for Senate in the state of Georgia, and her opponent, Reverend Warnock, was polling, I think he was in 4th place, when WNBA players from that Atlanta team and the rest of the 12 teams in the league decided to wear Vote Warnock shirts. And 7 months later, he had not only improved, but he had forced a runoff and he had won a Senate seat, which actually swung the balance of power in the United States Senate. So I think what we're learning is that these players have agency and that their activism can really make a difference. And so that's one example in terms of voting. We also, as an organization, opened the Veterans Memorial Coliseum, the Madhouse on McDowell, as a voting center in partnership with the state of Arizona during the national elections in last November. Not taking a position on who you should vote for, but wanting to make sure everyone, although I guess that has become polarizing, but wanting to make sure everyone had access to and the opportunity to vote. So I think that's one example from the last year.
Thank you. Neil or Tyler, anything that you want to add to Vince's comments?
Yeah, I think it is important to speak up. My organization, I'm proud to say, did speak up within a couple days of the insurrection in January with regard to the murder of George Floyd and other activities that have risen to that level of concern, right? And so we're seeing nationally, and in Arizona, there's clearly the same kind of indication that customers, consumers, employees, community members are actually looking to business leaders as much or more so than they're looking to government leaders for leadership on these issues and on these topics. So when folks say, oh, you business leaders, you need to sort of stay in your lane with regard to what the issue, don't speak out about it. My response has been, our lane is as wide as the Grand Canyon. And our members represent, if you add their employees and the employees' families, over 1 million people who live in this region. So we will speak out when we believe we should speak out on the very vital issues of the day. That does not mean every member agrees with what we say. And that does not mean business in general always agree on all these things. But we believe in openness. We believe in transparency. We want the dialogue to happen. And when appropriate, we will express the views that we believe are important for people to hear and people to know.
You're getting some agreement in the chat. A lot of people agree that businesses can be that force for good. Sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
I think in speaking to, obviously, amazing points. We saw a tremendous advocacy in the 2020 elections across industry verticals. There was, I think, more participation from business leaders and just individual businesses outside of the traditional role of just contributing to political campaigns. We saw promotional material. We saw a lot of folks taking stakes in the elections. I think outside of speaking up, in elections in general, PayPal has really tried to take the philosophy and in how we speak on public policy is really around protecting the wellness of communities. As any successful organization that speaks to or serves the general public, right? The world is diverse. You have to represent and speak up when communities are at risk. Literally, there's so many opportunities where you can speak on legislation that just doesn't have a purpose. We saw in Arizona a few times where we had, I think it was the Save Girls Sports Act or something along those lines that was targeting trans youth, right? Saying you can't participate. We know just historically, taking a look at the stances we've made, that there's backlash. You will hear back from people that take the opposite position, but protecting communities, especially communities that are vulnerable, is amazing for building that loyal connection to customers. We have created an opportunity, I think, globally for PayPal to be understood as a place where businesses of any size can thrive, and businesses owned by any person can thrive. So in keeping with that, we have to be very vigilant about what public policies take place in the states we operate in, and speak to them, especially when it's going to impact not only our employees, but our customer base. That's just how you interface with a very diverse global world. I think our CEO said it best, is diversity is a fact and inclusion is a choice. And that choice, I think, really starts in how you speak for your employees and how you stand for them again.
And
It's
Katie,
really well said, Tyler.
Sorry, the one thing that I would add to what Neil and Tyler said so well is that an organization like ours tends to have a larger microphone than maybe the average company, but it's organizations like Tyler's and PayPal and all the organizations Neil work with, who perhaps are invested with us, but certainly are in our market, who give us sort of the air cover to take positions like that, because those are really, really important business relationships for us. So when they lead in that space, that the momentum that creates, and the others who are able to speak out in those ways, it creates more momentum.
And I think thank you for that. I think the only thing I would add, and for the folks watching to, I'm sure they understand it, but maybe appreciate a little more in these very difficult, challenging times that we live in, very polarized, very dysfunctional, quite honestly, is everyone's going to play a different role in the advocacy ecosystem. There's going to be times when Angela and her group and all of you who are watching are going to call and send an email and do all this sort of stuff. And there's going to be other times when organizations or members of an organization like mine will individually be making calls and expressing their opinions, perhaps not in the public view, but a different level of advocacy. And so it's important to understand, I don't think any of us ever knows at one given time everything that everybody else is doing, right? That's kind of impossible, but everyone will have the opportunity to provide their voice and be advocates in the way that they think they can be most effective. Quite honestly, with some of the issues we deal with, it's more effective for me sometime not to be on a position paper and not to let everybody know this is what our position is, right? It's actually better for me to have conversations with people and talk to people without them already presupposing what I believe in. My opportunity to have influence from an advocacy standpoint might be greater in that instance than just giving the name of our organization or encouraging a couple of our members to give their businesses to a long list of organizations that are working it. So advocacy is complex. Angela and her team do it very, very well. And we all try to play the roles that we can play to be most effective for the outcome that we want.
Thanks, Neil. I love that idea of the advocacy ecosystem. I think it's so true, and all of your comments illustrated there's so many different ways that businesses can choose to be part of the solution and can be effective in the ways that they do it. Before we go to our next question, I did see another comment come up in the chat, and someone was asking about this idea of cancel culture. And is that something that any of you have run into before, or do you find that that dynamic ever prevents business leaders from wanting to take a public stance on different issues?
Well, I think the answer is, an easy answer is yes. These issues are complex, and the same policymakers that we may agree with on issues A, B, and C, we totally oppose the views that they have on X, Y, and Z, right? That's just the reality of our world, right? We all have more than one thing at a given time that we may be working on. Having said that, it is important to acknowledge that your voice will matter. And for myself, I cancel culture. I think the whole concept of cancel culture is misguided and it's wrong. Cancel culture is telling people they should not have a voice. And even the people I disagree with vehemently still have a right to their voice. So have at it, and I'm going to have at it, and we'll see who can have the most influence and who can prevail. That's not the majority view that way, especially more on the progressive side, but that's the way I approach it.
Thank you for that insight, Neil. And I think it fit well with another comment that came up in the chat about being able to share your opinions and make sure that everyone's voice is heard. And that actually is a good transition into our next question, which is when businesses do choose to use their voice, they clearly have the ability to create a lasting impact. So from your perspectives, what do you think makes business advocacy so impactful? Maybe Vince, do you want to kick us off?
I thought Tyler was ready to kick us off.
You both kind of looked like you're about to go.
Go ahead.
I think, the easy answer for me on this one is just really businesses have two primary areas to me that they have an advantage in advocacy. I think depending on the business, you have scale, you have reach across, here in the United States, you'd have, national reach, you can have international reach. You're connected to issues and kind of probably take on more responsibility as you grow your global footprint. You're connected to more countries, more sets of issues, right? So I think as you look at serving markets, the markets generate the issues you need to advocate on that are important to your business. But businesses are particularly effective because when they're larger businesses especially and make changes, they impact a larger scale of people. I think the second component, and I think this is one very much more personal to me as someone that manages a team of awesome analysts, I think it's really how we acknowledge the amount of time we spend working and the impact and the influence on our psychological wellness that an inclusive workplace and having someone in the workplace advocate for you does. I think, it goes without saying that having a job, having a roof over your head builds tremendous self-esteem. Having a career, all those things are very important to kind of a satisfactory experience in life in general. Knowing that who you are isn't an impediment to that success, that your employer stands up for you, that you're not as vulnerable. You have a kind of a big ally behind you, really does cement a lot of psychological wellness for people. So I think as you stand up for your employees and you really are an advocate, you're just adding that extra comfort layer on something we all have to contribute a lot of our life hours to, which is, our livelihoods, our crafts. At least you're doing it with someone that stands with you, and you're doing it in a way that has that beyond the material to it. You're there for a purpose. You're also there knowing that you're accepted and fully included.
Yeah, what I would add also is I think a lot of times we frame these conversations about business advocacy around what are the potential pitfalls of saying something, and I think another important thing to always consider: what are the pitfalls of not saying something? For starters, we look at the talent that we have within our building. Fans we can talk about and players we can talk about, but we're trying to recruit and retain top talent to work inside our organization. And if our organization has an opportunity to stand up about something or for something that is incredibly important to the folks who work with us, and I think we all know, we've all seen statistics around as the workforce gets younger, how important it is for people to work at a place that reflects their values. What is like I said, what is the cost of not saying something? And I think in terms of recruiting new talent, retaining the talent we have, there is a cost there. And the other thing I would say is, it's just that I always tell people, the ship has just sort of sailed. It feels like it's new that these companies are sort of or teams or organizations are deciding to have a voice. And we mentioned cancel culture. Maybe if we beat them down or say we won't go to their games or say we won't buy their products, they'll stop doing that. I mean, the reality of it is the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? That's not going anywhere, whether it's at least in my space. From players to our organization to our leagues, it's just quite frankly not going anywhere. And so channeling that into the best way to make an impact in your communities has now become the focus.
Yeah, that both Tyler and Vince really summed it up really well. I like to acknowledge the fact that every one of us is a consumer, and so therefore we have relationships with businesses. I'm sitting here using electricity from the main power company to keep cool. I'm on my MacBook Air product. I'm sitting on a chair that I bought in Tempe. You just kind of go down. So as consumers, we have a relationship with business. And as consumers, we have the opportunity to speak to those businesses and talk to them about what's important to us as consumers. And I'm one of those people. I realize I may be a little out of the norm, but I actually patronize or not the places that support things that I believe in. And I don't think I'm canceling anyone by doing that. I'm doing just the opposite. I'm including and accepting that relationship on a business relationship that's important to me. So it's all interspersed, and in a more and more complex society, more and more voices are going to rise, and that's more and more opportunity for us to bring people along and help them understand our issues in more compelling ways, so they too will not just be silent, but will become advocates.
Thanks, Neil. And those are all great points. And I see Angela said in the chat, one community's first tagline, you vote with your wallet every day. And it's so true. I think all of us have more power than maybe we realize because of that relationship that each of us as individual consumers has with businesses. And it's great to hear from all of you about how your different organizations are taking that step. You know, maybe it starts with just being vocal on something, and businesses start to hone their expertise, and then they put that into action and bring it out to the world. And I think it's really incredible to see how that plays out. So all of you actually kind of started to touch on this, which is our next question. You know, implementing and advancing policies that bring impacts to society are beneficial to us all, but do you all see specific benefits that businesses gain? And this can either be internally, like Tyler and Vince mentioned with recruitment, or it could be, you know, externally from a kind of public point of view, like Neil mentioned. Anything else you want to add to that?
I mean, I think the most direct link for us is you know, we're trying to widen the circle of fans. When the positions that we're taking that can be considered controversial, whatever, our focus is on widening the circle. Our focus is on everyone being welcome at our games. Our focus is on lifting up and providing representation and visibility to groups that marginalized groups that may not always receive that. And so what we've always tried to lean into as a brand, especially on the WNBA side, our athletes, our fans, our league itself exists at, we talk about intersectionality, it exists at the intersection of women, mostly women of color, especially Black women, and the LGBT community and its allies. And so, you know, as we lean into those groups, we are saying to those groups, whether you see yourself reflected in other spaces or not, young, old, you are reflected here and you are welcome here. And that's, you know, there's a fairly direct correlation between that and us trying to sell tickets. Neil mentioned, you know, the ecosystem and the folks we support. You know, that's all part of it. And we very much lean into that. We are a mission-based organization with basketball as the vehicle. And we have seen not only an expansion of our fan base when we decided to lean into that, but we've also seen sort of a deepening of the relationship with the existing fans who have come up to me, come up to our players and said, what you did in this instance, what you did for this event, what you did in the wake of this was incredibly meaningful to me. And so adding more relationships, but also sort of deepening the affinity within the relationships that you have, I think is incredibly important.
Thanks, Vince. I love that idea of widening your circle. It's so true. It's such an important aspect, whether it's with players or with your business employees or whoever is in your life. I think that's extremely insightful. Neil or Tyler, do either of you have anything to add to that?
Tyler?
I think the question overall is really fascinating and actually is touching on something Neil mentioned earlier, and it's something around expectations that consumers have, and really around the way residents are starting to look to businesses for more effective leadership and solutions to public issues. I think for me, the biggest takeaway from this question and looking at how the role of larger businesses is being scoped and looked at in society is you have to begin coming to the realization that profit and purpose are not incompatible. you can move forward and have a very successful margin. You can do a successful business and stay core to your purpose. You know, PayPal in 2020 invested $500 million in equity, set aside off our balance sheet and began a series of grants, distributions to small businesses around America. We help participate in a lot of programs offering free financial services for paycheck protection. Really kind of coming into the idea that for a nominal cost to us, offering services for free for a limited period of time during a pandemic and a crisis, really trying to fight like some of the root causes of inequity, the lack of investment in minority businesses. Coming back into that lens, when you take such actions, you're not just doing it for a philanthropic gain. There's actual relationships being built. You're investing in a community on the rise. You're investing on a community in their potential. We all know that American businesses in particular, regardless across demographic slice, are innovative, growth oriented. When you see sectors that have been, undervalued, not invested in, and communities that haven't been invested in, that's just potential waiting to happen. And again, profit and purpose don't have to be incompatible. You don't have to approach everything with just either a purely profit lens or a purely philanthropic lens. And as businesses become even more integrated into sort of like solving problems and not just sort of being the driver of some of the problems, you're going to continue to see this where businesses look to be more social in that lens of profit and purpose not being incompatible.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I see that all the time in my work too. And it's a great feeling when you know that it's so ingrained in your company's culture. And I think it keeps your employees around, it keeps people coming to, use your business, your service. And I agree with that completely. So that was really great. And Neil, you're in an interesting position because you work with so many different businesses and CEOs and organizations. So I'm sure you see a lot of different perspectives. So from these different kinds of organizations that you work with, how are they approaching this in terms of what do they see as the gain for taking more socially responsible actions with their companies?
Good question. And I think it goes back to their relationship with their consumer, their relationship with their employees, and wrapping those two together to make sure that there's a good alignment, an alignment that people are comfortable with, both as employees and then the relationship the organization has with their consumers. And I do see that I have the largest employers in Arizona are members of my organization, and some smaller organizations that are also doing really incredible things. But there's a continuum of engagement based upon the capacity of the organization and based upon the relationship that they have with the broader community. Some are extremely visible and extremely supportive, and others are very, very supportive, but not very visible at all, right? So everybody's going to find what works for them. But we're finding more and more, like I said earlier, people are expecting business leaders to speak out. What gives me hope is that we hear from younger people more and more that it's not just okay for them to speak out, but they're expecting them to speak out. They want to know, and they are self-selecting their relationship with businesses based upon their willingness to speak out on behalf of things that are important to them, right? And again, it's not so much a cancel culture, it's a welcome for those with like values and like beliefs for how we want to live together as people in this right now. It is a very, very difficult, disjointed, and dysfunctional society when it comes to issues and our politics and everything that we're dealing with. I mean, it just is. And so people are looking for a greater connection rather than just, oh, I like that, so I'm going to buy it, or I saw this or whatever, right? I think the expectation has been raised for business to be transparent and be open and state what they believe to be true, and then back it up.
Definitely. I agree. And as a millennial, I'll speak for others in my generation. I do think that tends to be the case. I think now it's just taken as standard that diversity of people and perspectives is crucial for innovation. And I like what Tyler said earlier. It's a fact, and you can choose to be inclusive. And I think everyone benefits from taking that action. So Vince, sorry, it looked like you were going to add something.
I'm always going to add something. No, I would just add that exactly to your point, there are so many layers to it in terms of what being socially responsible means, and I think part of it is exactly what Neil was just talking about. Part of it is exactly what Tyler was talking about in terms of investing $500 million into communities. But I would also say that I mean, PayPal CEO Dan Schulman is a personal hero of mine. But one of the things, one of the things Dan has done, and Tyler, don't let me misquote this, but that doesn't require a press release, that isn't this huge outlay of cash, is he made sure when he took over that his board was balanced in terms of male and female. He made sure that men and women within his organization who were doing the same things and had the same experience were making the same amount of money. And things like that speak to being socially responsible. It speaks to, as we talked about, the kind of place people want to work, but it also speaks to just this concept of think globally but act locally, right? What can you do within your organization to set that kind of precedent for those people? So I think that's incredibly important. And then, I also think, look, in terms of sports, like we said, there are athletes who have these experiences and who aren't going anywhere, and they're going to continue to talk about it. And last August, I believe, athletes decided that sports weren't going to be played on one particular day in the wake of a police shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And when they realized that they had that kind of agency, it wasn't just, okay, the world needs to stop because of us. It was so they could have conversations, not just with fans, but with the owners of their organizations to say, okay, we're out on this limb and we need you to join us. And we need you to tell us exactly what you're going to do within your spheres of influence, not just with money, but also with money, to be out here with us. And so the exercise of that kind of power by players is inspiring to a lot of people, and it's certainly not going anywhere. So I think I sort of look forward to that next generation of athlete, like you talked about millennials, of athletes that just see that as part of being an athlete because of the platforms that they have and the people for whom they are speaking who don't have the same size microphone and platform that they do.
Thanks, Vince. And that actually fits well with a comment I see that we got in the chat. We do talk a lot about millennials and, Gen Z and these younger generations who, see a lot of this as an important part of their value ecosystem. But also we still have, a large, significant portion of our population, which are older generation. So, from all of your perspectives, how do we re-engage those populations that maybe aren't always at the forefront of these conversations, or maybe who want to be, but feel like, they don't have the same microphone that some of the younger generations do?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. I think from having worked in advocacy, you never put somebody sort of off to the side. Everyone should be an opportunity to communicate with, and everyone can be enlightened and understand your position. You have to have an approach that allows you to have that opportunity. If you aren't working to have that opportunity, you're never going to change hearts and minds, right? If I only talk to people who are on this call about these issues, then I'm not influencing anybody, because chances are everybody pretty much, we're all kind of on the same page. I have to have conversations with people who may not agree with me all the time, but at least will let me have that conversation. And I can't discount them because I want a win tomorrow, right? You think of the progress we have made in this LGBTQ AI plus community, and just the fact that it's QAI plus means that it's broadened, right? It's different than it was when I was running GLAAD in 2006. It's different than it was even 10 years ago, right? So we have to be open to that evolution. We wouldn't be where we are if people had not evolved to where they are today. So let's look at everybody in the broader business advocacy ecosystem as an opportunity to learn more about our issues, appreciate them in ways that they don't appreciate them today, perhaps, and see when we can bring them in. And one community has been masterful at doing that in Arizona. and it's been a tremendous success. And so individually and collectively, I would encourage us to take that kind of approach. Don't write anybody off. And I know there are people we want to write off, and we can send different people to talk to those people if we're not fully comfortable, but we can't write anyone off. I know some folks who were pretty negative and not allies of our community not long ago, who are now some of our tremendous voices and tremendous supporters. And had we written them off, we wouldn't have the opportunity today that we have with those allies. So that's tough, but it's important work.
Really well said, Neil. And I like Angela added, we'll have a cup of coffee with anyone. And I agree with your shout out for one community. I do think, you know, you all have done an excellent job in making sure that every community within your state is engaged in this work and understands the significance of this work. So that's incredible. So I think that's actually a really good segue into our next question, which is now, you know, thinking about the future. Do you think this concept of social responsibility is a temporary phase, or do you think it speaks to the evolving nature of business's role in society? And on top of that, do you think that it's a good thing? I see you nodding, Neil. Do you want to start?
Well, I gave a talk on this the other day, so I don't want to dominate the conversation here. The answer is unknown. I think we're in a period that, and we're just sort of getting into the period where there's a reset taking place, politically, economically. I almost like to think we may be at the beginning of another sort of gilded age within our American society here. The disparity in wealth, the growing pressures on institutions, the level of, and this is a small c for corruption, and I don't mean that's the sense of what we think of as corruption, but just our institutions being corrupted by things that are going on in society and not enough challenge to all that. I just think all these things combined are going to make for a very challenging next decade or so in the broader ecosystem for the issues that we really care about. And it's going to be important for us to kind of go up on the balcony and watch a little bit what's taking place to be able to get on the stage in a more effective way moving forward. But I do have hope. And I have hope because of the young people and because of people who are engaging in new ways like they never have before. And all of that gives me great hope.
I'm glad to hear it. Vince, Tyler, anything to add about where you think the future of social responsibility is?
Well, I mean, I kind of agree. I think where we're at a pivot point right now, there's a lot of variables that determine how engaged the business community is going to be in social issues on a longer term basis. But I do think you've seen a core commitment in some sectors because it matches their I think not only their business model, but just where they see their imprint in the world and what they want to be known for. I see it in my sector in technology, a little more prevalently, I think, in other sectors. It's been around longer, so I see the longevity prospects a lot more there. And I think in technology, we're always recognizing, you know, that from the start, LGBTQIA people were early adopters of technology. They've been a core business group, core consumer group, core member of our businesses for decades. I think when you kind of just take a step back and say, where are the businesses at? It's really going to be their culture that drives how much they engage. So to the extent you have some businesses that I think have a younger base of employees, they're certainly every business that wants to stay in business and continue operating 100 years from now incorporates new generations. We don't live forever, so we need to have that continuity. And I think in that, you're going to see the importation of values of each generation. And I can say safely, just in looking at tons of generational studies as we do, the Gen Z, I want to say, has really demonstrated an affinity for activism sometimes in the absence even of direct generational alignment or cause. You see a lot of other generations had big events happening to align them, right? You had, in boomers and early Gen Xers, you had the Vietnam War, you had a lot of social change and activism. You saw Gen Z just really being like active and looking at just that step back examination of society, saying, I don't really like this. I'm going to start questioning things like, is capitalism equitable? Does this economy have a chance for me to be included? I hear my older brothers and sisters in the millennial generation telling me how awful this debt load is, and I have a lot of financial insecurities. So you saw, I think, really early with them just saying, like, the culmination of probably from Gen X on, questioning the cracks in the system and looking at the way in which the economy serves us. And Gen Z has just really been active from the get-go. So I'm pretty hopeful that as they grow and ascend their careers, that influence is going to go upward, and it will sustain. I certainly hope it does.
I mean, I think these guys captured it. The one thing I would add is I would sort of all of the three of us, I think I would be the most sure that it's not going anywhere, because I think if I've learned anything over the course of the last 5 years or so, it's that whether it was my education growing up or just, where I was at in the world, there were a lot of things that I just sort of assumed were finished business. Like, racism is wholly unacceptable, so we're good there. Racism mostly just impacts Black people, so we're good there. Asian Americans and those folks are good there. The Supreme Court said gays can marry, so we're good there. And so what I've realized over the course of the last 12, 18, 24 months is there's a lot of ways where these are continuing fights. There is no finish line related to these things. And there were a lot of ways we can say, now we have a woman who's the vice president of the United States, so to a large degree the glass ceiling is broken. But we all know organizations where the senior level leadership and their executive teams, 9 out of 10 of them are white men. And so what I think we're starting to realize is that, and I'm not saying that's inherently bad, I'm just saying a lack of diversity is an issue, right? And so I think what we're realizing is that related to so many of these issues, and I'm sure 10 issues that I'm not even thinking about, there is no finish line. And we're going to continue to see people and therefore see organizations who are looking to make sure we are progressing in a way that makes our company cultures, our society at large, more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. I mean, DE&I isn't just a fad in my mind. So I think that's what gives me the confidence to say that level of responsibility, what employees are going to expect of their employers, what employers are going to expect of their municipalities, and what we're all going to expect of our state and our country and each other. I don't see that as going anywhere.
I love that description, Vince, that there's no finish line. I think it's an important reminder for all of us is that this work continues on. And I see that we have some folks in the chat who are agreeing with that sentiment as well. So we're getting into the last few minutes of our panel today. I figured I'd maybe turn it over to each of you and see if you had any closing thoughts, calls to action, anything else that you'd like to share with all of the folks who've tuned in today.
I'll go first because I don't want to have the last word after these two guys. So the first thing I would say is buy Phoenix Mercury tickets. And I would say that because, as Angela says, you vote with your wallet, right? If there are companies, if there are organizations, if there are individuals who are outspoken and reflect your values, it's incredibly important that you support them, whether it's a sports team or anyone else. Because here's the thing, whether on social media or elsewhere, the people who disagree with those positions are always the loudest, always. And so it's easy for companies or individuals to feel like maybe we're too far out on this limb, when in actuality, so many of the folks who agree with them just agree with them passively. Like, yep, that's good. I'm good. I have no issue with that. But you don't hear them as loudly as the folks on the other side. So I say it in jest, but I mean it. Buy Mercury tickets. And thank you, Angela, for putting the link in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Vince. Tyler?
Sure. I would just say for everyone that's a business leader, really take an opportunity to see where you stand and where your company stands. Take an opportunity to get involved in simple, nonpartisan advocacy. Angela and One Community have done such a tremendous amount of work in creating educational material, creating opportunities for anyone to participate in. Just make your voice heard. I think too many of us have opinions, too many of us who are gay, who are trans, who are intersex, who are all members of LGBTQI community, who are leaders in the community. We're speaking out, we're trying to be visible, be seen. We do that part, right? But I think it's for other business leaders where we haven't heard from you. If your company has been reserved about taking stances, take a moment to challenge that. Take a moment to have the conversations inside your company and have your company be part of this conversation. You know, it's really not as daunting as you think to get involved in social advocacy as a business, and just taking stances on what I think are just really low-hanging fruit issues, especially things like the state of equality in Arizona for LGBTQIA people. Just getting involved and speaking up, I think is the hugest thing I can ask you to take away, and just really ask yourselves, what is the stance we're going to be passionate about? What can I have? And at least have the conversation internally. You're a valued employee in that organization. You are a leader. They put you in that role for a reason. So speak up and find the issue that you're going to be passionate about.
Well said. Thanks, Tyler.
Much what Vince and Tyler has said. I will only say thank you to those of you who are participating in this today, who are allies. We would not be where we are without you. Thank you to the corporate community who has led the way for diversity and inclusion in this country for 25 years. Even before many communities, cities, and towns were adopting policies of inclusion, businesses and corporate America was leading the way with those policies, and then educating a whole community of employees, millions of employees, with regard to why those policies were important for their workforce. So thank you to the members of the LGBT community, LGBTQAI plus community as well. It's your visibility. I used to say when I was at GLAAD, your visibility doesn't make a bit of difference. It makes all the difference. And those of you who are living out and living open and living proudly are influencing people around you without you even knowing you're having that influence. And that's really an important component of advocacy, being able to point to and show the visibility that our community has. So big thanks to all the allies, big thanks to everyone in the community, to One Community, and hope everybody has a good summer and gets through it okay here in the Arizona heat.
Thanks, Neil. And I saw Angela also add in the chat, if you're looking for another action you can take, it only takes 1 minute to sign the Unity Pledge at openaz.com. Well, I definitely know that I'm really optimistic after hearing all of your comments today, and I can see there's a lot of similar comments in the chat, so I think everyone agrees. You know, some of the topics that we've discussed today are complicated systemic issues, so it's going to take all of us, whether you're public, private, business, institution, an individual, or a community group. I think it's going to take all of us, you know, working together to create that better future that we've talked about today. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen virtually. I'm sorry we couldn't all be together, but it was great to do this virtually. And I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation. I think it does truly show how interconnected we all are, whether it's addressing inequality, climate change, the pandemic, any of the large issues of our time. I think we can do it if we work together. So thank you. Let's carry this forward and continue on. And I hope you all have a great rest of your days.